All right, so today we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the medical forensic examination for collective of evidence. Okay, so this is um, the main purpose into us providing the hospital accompaniment. Okay, oops, let me exit out of that. All right, so when it comes to understanding the purpose, there are two options primarily when survivors are working, do attend for hospital accompaniment, of course, okay? So before we go into the actual reporting of the exam, we want to talk about the purpose of non-reporting, okay? Because survivors have that right on whether they choose to report the sexual assault or not, okay? We want to make sure that offering non-report options, because it balances the victim's autonomy, so their choices with criminal justice needs by preserving evidence, okay? Understanding that survivors can still receive medical care as they need and collect the forensic evidence without law enforcement involvement. So you can still be able to receive that same exam, okay? As opposed to supportive services for survivors, FIC being the local sexual assault prevention assistance program, we will provide those confidential services, that emotional support and advocacy when we attend the hospital, guidance on whether they want to report or not, or what if their options are, and the reporting process, and then of course the accompaniment to the ER. So who qualifies for a non-report? Okay, so say you have a survivor that does not report. Well, in the state of Texas, you do have to be at least 18 years old, um, seek medical attention within 120 hours or within 5 days of the assault, and they have to consent to the exam. This is only for non-report exams, okay? However, for children or minors that are under the age of 18, they do not give the option of non-reporting, okay? Which means that if a child or parent brings a child to the hospital reporting sexual assault, it is required that assault to be reported to law enforcement, okay? So understand that the forensic part of the exam, its purpose is to preserve that crucial evidence just in case a survivor actually decides to report later, okay? So that is why those non-report options are available, and they will still, regardless if they choose to report or not, receive medical care and have options in the future. So when it comes to the non-report, okay, so when a non-report happens, remember, they still are eligible and they still will receive the actual same portion of exam. It is actually stored by the Department of Public Safety as opposed to law enforcement, okay? That evidence from the rape kit is stored for 2 years from the date of collection. Okay, so that gives survivors 2 years to decide whether they want to report and use that rape kit. Okay, if the survivor chooses to not report within 2 years, the DPS will actually destroy the evidence. Okay, there is also a new law that just actually passed recently with the last 87th legislature, which offers limited consent. And so what that holds is that they still have the option of non-reporting. So say a survivor comes to the hospital and they do not want to report, but they want to have their rape kit tested, okay? Prior to this law, if you didn't report, you didn't get your rape kit tested, okay? They now have the option of a limited consent. So limited consent says that you still have the option to not report, but you can give us consent to test your kit, okay? Just in case you are on the fence, like the survivor's on the fence about reporting. If they sign that limited consent form, they now have, instead of 2 years from non-report, they will have 5 years to decide if they want to report it, okay? So you have the no consent, and then they do not want to report. Then you have the limited consent. They do want the kit tested, but they still don't want to report. That's 5 years, okay? And then we'll talk about the actual report to law enforcement for the investigation, okay? So under this option of non-reporting, understand when it comes to cost, the DPS actually covers the cost of the forensic portion of the exam, okay? Survivors have medical reimbursement opportunities through crime victims compensation as it relates to the exams, so they can submit for reimbursement, okay, for those medical costs. So this is a way for survivors to still get the exam that they need covered, so that is not another financial barrier. Okay. However, understand that if there's any other follow-up medical treatment that happens in non-reporting, it is not covered under the non-report exam reimbursement. So when it comes to access to forensic medical exams, how are they conducted? Like, where are they? Majority of the same exams are done in the ER. Okay, sometimes there are same designated facilities, you know, in rural areas, and then sometimes in some other areas you might have like Texas Department of State Health Services, they may conduct them as well. But majority of them, we do always try to have sane options in the ER or medical professionals in that ER. So as far as us for our area, like other hospitals like CN and Advent Health, they are not certified to be able to, even though they have an ER, so they will transfer those clients to Baylor Scott and White, okay? So the purpose of understanding survivor choice. So priorly, forensic exams were only provided to survivors who chose to report the crime. So we're going to talk about that shift in client autonomy and everything, which made sense. You know, if you are going to choose to report, we're going to collect evidence, okay? Sometimes survivors just need time to prepare before actually thinking about any legal proceedings, okay? They're unsure, you know, so we see that this policy change where now evidence can be collected even if they choose to not report at that time. So this next one, we're going to watch a video on, this is actually a depiction of what happens with SAFE in Austin. So SAFE Austin partners with Brave Alliance, okay? And Brave Alliance is actually a sane company that they partner with. And they actually, remember we talked about smaller organizations being able to collaborate with sexual assault programs, and how the process of the ER when a survivor is going there after a sexual assault. Okay, we're going to go ahead and we will watch that.
We understand that it really takes some courage for people to reach out to healthcare providers, and particularly people that they don't know after having been sexually assaulted or been in a life-threatening situation. We always appreciate it when people do reach out to us, because we are here to have conversations with people and offer whatever kind of care it is that they might like to have.
My name's Natalie. I'm a forensic nurse here at SAFE. My main role here is to make sure that you're healthy and you're safe. Everything else that we do here is completely optional. I'll go over all of your options with you, but you get to pick and choose what you do and don't want to do as part of this exam.
Okay. When people choose an evidence collection exam, that process can take about 4 hours. Most of it's talking, and it includes things like your medical history. What are you allergic to? What kind of medications are you taking? Those kinds of questions. And it also includes a history of what it is that happened. We'll ask for that information and then write it down verbatim. And that helps us understand what we need to do with the rest of our encounter. It helps us decide what we need to look for and where, and things that we might be able to skip, and things that we need to focus on.
What if I don't know some of this stuff?
If you don't know, that's totally okay.
Okay.
That's a completely fine answer to just say I don't know.
Okay, because there's a big portion of the night that I don't remember.
And I encourage you not to try and fill in the blanks and just tell me what you remember, and that's okay.
Okay.
The process also includes a head-to-toe exam. We're going to look for injuries. We're going to look for any place that there might have been touch contact or that we know there was touch contact, because we will stop and swab for DNA. That's a pretty simple process that involves Q-tips that have sterile water on the ends. We just rub those against people's skin and then package those up and send them along as well. The head-to-toe exam, checking for injury, can include diagramming, measuring, and photographing injuries if people are okay with us doing that. The last part of that exam is usually taking a look at anogenital area, and it's for the same reasons. We're checking for injury, we're swabbing for DNA, and we're also looking for anything that might not belong to that person. That part of the whole encounter takes about 5 minutes, unless there's something that's out of the ordinary that needs to be dealt with.
You know, I know you said you're not sure if there's any contact to that part of you, but sometimes DNA can end up in that area just because of all the ridges that are there.
For people who would like to have an evidence collection exam without talking to the police first, there are a couple things that are different. We are not going to collect blood or urine for toxicology, so if somebody thinks that they might have been dosed with something, that might lean them towards considering reporting to law enforcement, because that's the only way that those things are going to get collected and then potentially tested. The non-report option is designed to give people some time to think about what they might like to do and whether or not they want to involve the police after a sexual assault.
A survivor can have a complete evidentiary exam without reporting to law enforcement within 120 hours, that's 5 days, of when the assault happened. They can have what we call a non-report exam to go ahead and gather and preserve that evidence so that it's not lost. And then they have 5 years to decide if they want to report to law enforcement or not. Meanwhile, that evidence is preserved.
So if I did this without talking to the cops, does that mean my evidence gets tested?
So if you don't report to the police, the evidence would just go to storage. So there would be no testing of any of the swabs or anything unless you decided to report to the police.
Okay, because I don't know if I want to call the cops or not at this point.
At any point during that 5 years, they can decide to convert that kit that was collected to a report, and then that evidence will be submitted for testing.
If someone comes in less than 120 hours, we are able to provide a medical forensic exam. That includes evidence collection, a pregnancy test, medication that can prevent pregnancy, medication that can prevent sexually transmitted infections, testing for infections as well. If someone comes in after 120 hours and they have, which we consider that a non-acute examination, we are able to still provide the medical forensic exam. With that, we won't collect any evidence, but they are able to receive medications if needed to prevent infections, or we can offer them testing to prevent infections.
In the state of Texas, victims have the legal right to have an advocate who is specially trained in the room with them during their evidentiary exam or their sexual assault medical forensic exam.
I'm Christina. I'm going to be your advocate today. I'm going to be with you here during the exam if that's something that you would like. It's your right. I'm here to support you, provide you emotional support. We can do some safety planning to make sure that when you leave here you feel good about where you're going.
Advocates also play a crucial role in providing crisis stabilization, talking to survivors about the effects of trauma and maybe what to anticipate in the coming days. Another legal option that advocates will discuss with survivors is their legal right to use a pseudonym or not.
And what that is a name that they choose that's not their own to protect their identity. And that can be used in the police report, in court documents, and it gives them some anonymity as they move through the criminal justice system.
Pseudonyms are a part of safety planning because some survivors, that might be a deterrent to reporting to law enforcement, and then when they understand that right to use a pseudonym, that makes all the difference in them feeling comfortable going ahead and making a report.
It's important for people to understand that it's not your fault if you've been sexually assaulted. And we take care of folks in a way that is very centered on them and very trauma informed, and we provide options, and we don't have an agenda really outside of healthcare and well-being and safety. So those are the things that we like to emphasize when people come in and have questions.
The first step would be to call our 24/7 confidential safe line. You can call, chat, or text.
We are available 24/7 for the medical forensic exams, and you can call our nurse line 512-738-8817. We are able to do all of those things for free.
All right. right. Okay. So I really like that video. It really kind of shows everyone's role between the same examiner, what the advocate's role is in that. Okay. But we're going to go over some of the parts of that video in more detail. Okay. So for starters, when we're talking about emergency room protocol, okay, sexual assault cases require very extensive forensic examination. In the video, they talked about the difference between an acute exam and a non-acute exam. The acute exam is evidence collection that happens within 120 hours. The non-acute exam is anything that happens beyond 120 hours where no evidence collection is made, okay? So unlike other violent crimes where evidence such as like bullets or weapons can be removed, when it comes to survivors of sexual assault, their body is actually the crime scene. Okay. And so what happens is during that forensic examination, they're going to get a full body assessment with detailed documentation of injuries. That documentation will be uh, paperwork that they're going to be asked questions as well as actual camera footage. They take pictures of the entire survivor's body, and details of that. They're going to collect blood and saliva samples. They can also collect fingernail scrapings. So if they possibly scraped like the perpetrator's skin trying to get them off them, there'll be DNA evidence within that. And then there's swabbing. So that means that they can swab other areas as well as other orifices to see if there's any DNA evidence there, okay? And this is very important because often a lot of times the sexual assault cases is their word against, the perpetrator's word, right? And sometimes they just lack multiple witnesses, and sometimes they may not, even go. So physical evidence is very crucial to strengthening prosecution when it comes to holding perpetrators accountable, okay? The forensic exam also helps to substantiate those allegations that are made and preserve evidence for court proceedings. So why is that immediate medical attention critical? Well, we know that physical evidence deteriorates over time. So that is why there is a certain number of hours where we have survivors, if they are reporting, not even reporting, if they were sexually assaulted, we want to make sure that they do get the SANE exam, okay? During that time is where you're going to mostly find that DNA evidence. A lot of times you may see survivors that actually will take a shower and they're not supposed to. So having that time frame and where they're actually getting that SANE exam is very important, okay? It also shows the likelihood of injury detection, and forensic evidence recovery is its highest immediately right after assault. And so there may be the assault that happened and there may be a slightly bruised, but maybe in a few days that bruise may get a little more bluer or blacker, okay? And so that is why those pictures are important too. If also, if we are doing things beyond 120 hours, it also decreases the probability that there's any evidence collection. So there is actually a higher chance of detecting what those injuries are, and that includes internal injuries as well, okay? When an examination is delayed, we see that physical injuries are going to start to heal, okay? DNA evidence may be actually washed away, and some clothings may actually lose those critical fibers or fluids that may have happened within the sexual assault or trace of evidence, okay? So understand that the survivor's body and their clothing can hold that crucial evidence, linking the perpetrator to the crime. The role of the medical personnel, their main role is to conduct that forensic examination. Okay, so this is where they're collecting and documenting that physical evidence. They are also going to provide medical treatment. So regardless if they want to report or not, survivors will get medical treatment. They're going to address any injuries that have happened, give them preventative medication or antibiotics for infections, and offer emergency contraception if it's needed. They're also going to make sure they provide psychological support through trauma-informed care, okay? And maintaining that chain of custody, which means that they are very particular about how they are collecting that evidence, which is very crucial and essential for legal proceedings, okay? The portion of everything is that having well-documented forensic evidence can be the deciding factor in certain legal cases. So if there's any cross-contamination of anything that happens, you'll notice that when they are performing the forensic examination, they're very particular about everything. For instance, if they are collecting a hair follicle sample, they're going to put that hair into a piece of paper, or well, it'll be like a wax paper, and then they'll fold it up, and then it'll go into a bag that'll be sealed, okay? So that there's no way that that hair follicle can be lost. It has moisture prevention where it's not going to get like mold or anything like that, like those types of things. So they're very careful about how they're storing that evidence that they're collection. In addition, compassionate medical care supports emotional healing. Okay, so it's very important that when you are attending as an advocate, you're providing that compassionate care. Okay, it takes a lot for survivors to come forward and even acknowledge that, hey, I was a sexual assault survivor, regardless if they're reporting or not. Going forward and actually saying it for the first time is very empowering and scary at the same time. So it encourages survivors sometimes to seek justice about what happened to them. So when you're talking about the medical treatment, so sometimes you'll have survivors that may not want to get medical treatment or even like report, because a lot of times they may confuse, oh, okay, if I am I going to the doctor, that means I'm reporting. And those are two different things, okay? So at the very least, all survivors are going to receive medical treatment, okay? And some challenges sometimes, it's hard in certain rural areas where they just don't have access to hospitals that can provide those same exams, okay? You may have some private physicians' offices where they may not have sexual assault evidence collection kits, but they should have certain trained staff that's able to do them. Sometimes there are not hospitals that offer 24 hours availability, so that could be another barrier to survivors not being able to seek treatment, okay? And in certain rural areas in Texas, some areas lack, those important documentation and SANE kits. And survivors may have to travel up to between 100 or 200 miles just to receive care, okay? Sometimes there's alternative facilities that have to be equipped with those evidence collection kits. And sometimes there's challenges with coordination between local law enforcement and sexual assault programs. So it's very important that that collaboration is met. So what are some treatment options and recommendations? So for starters, for adults, they should be treated in designated medical facilities, okay? And children should be treated in pediatric units. So the way that medical personnel or even advocates are working with adults are going to be different than how they're working with children, okay? And staff does need to be trained in that, specifically with medical personnel. They are very specially trained in knowing how to do a child forensic examination. That is not your role to do that, but your role is to be there for the child or be there for the parent or that secondary household, okay? Also, the importance of training is regardless of the facility, the medical personnel should be trained in forensic evidence collection and be skilled in trauma-sensitive care, okay? And these are all recommendations from the Office of the Attorney General Sexual Assault Prevention and Crisis Services Program, where the main thing we're discussing is making sure that we have proper trained personnel in the right facility to provide both medical outcomes and legal justice. So how does payment for sexual assault medical exams work in Texas? Well, for starters, it's going to determine whether or not, like we said, whether they're going to choose to report or not, okay? If a survivor does choose to report, that local law enforcement where the incident happened, they will actually pay for the medical forensic examinations and the evidence collection that happens at the hospital, okay? And this is found in Texas state law under the Code of Criminal Procedures, Article 56.06, okay? If the survivor chooses to not report at the time, The DPS will actually cover the cost of that evidence collection if they undergo a medical forensic exam without notifying the police, okay? And again, that's found in the Texas Code of Criminal Procedures, Article 56.065. Okay, so notice the difference between a report versus a non-report and who is actually paying for that medical examination, okay? So, however, there could sometimes be medical costs that are separate from evidence collection. So that means that just that medical portion of where they're collecting that evidence, those are the things. But there may be other medical criteria that may happen when they go. Sometimes there may be injuries. So survivors may still receive medical bills, say they had to receive a CAT scan, all those additional areas. Maybe they were strangled and they need to do an internal investigation to see if they're the injuries that are internal. So they may still receive those medical bills. Understand that that is why those financial assistance can be available through the Crime Victims Compensation to reimburse for those medical expenses. So what are some requirements for medical facilities that are dedicated to providing sexual assault examinations? Well, for starters, they do have to offer 24-hour emergency availability, okay? And they do have to have trained staff for conducting those sexual assault forensic examinations. They also must collaborate with the local sexual assault program. So that is exactly why we are required to do that as the Rape Crisis Center for our area, okay? There are specialized medical support, and so they have physicians that are on call and that they are available for consultation if needed, specifically for additional injuries that may happen to help the survivor in any future medical treatment or while they're there, okay? They also help with the forensic documentation, so those contingency plans in case they need to do pictures for evidence, or even sometimes there's bite mark impressions on the survivor's body. So if a survivor actually attends a hospital that does not have a SANE program or have a medical personnel that is able to conduct those SANE exams, okay? So they can offer them to be transferred. They should offer for them to be transferred, okay? So they can be transferred to the nearest treatment facilities. So say a survivor went to Seton and they are wanting a SANE exam, Seton wouldn't do it. They would transfer them to Baylor Scott and White, okay? It is important to understand that during a transfer, it could have a survivor lose certain evidence. So anytime we're moving a survivor from one place to another place, it could offer certain examination risks where you actually are destroying forensic evidence that may be on that survivor's body. So for instance, because that survivor, remember we talked about the survivor's body as the crime scene. If they're entering, they go from the ER, now they're going to the ambulance if they're providing that transfer via ambulance, and then now they're going to another ER. So their DNA could be, or the DNA of the perpetrator could be in all of these areas, everything that they touch, right? So understand that evidence should be protected as best as possible from that transferring hospital during the examination, the treatment, and the transfer, okay? There are also medical priorities that may happen during the transfer. So before they actually transfer the survivor, they're gonna make sure that they treat those medical and psychological injuries before the transfer, okay? In addition, before the survivor is transferred for the actual SANE exam to the SANE facility, the survivor will take with them a physical copy of all their medical records, including any x-rays or additional tests that they did in the first hospital. They're going to be transferred with the survivor, okay? Now, there's certain legal protections for that, where hospitals receiving federal funds, they cannot refuse treatment or transfer a survivor unless their condition is stable. So they do have to be stable before the transfer, and survivors must receive adequate care before any transfer takes place. So when it comes to community coordination, okay, every hospital has to have a transfer plan, okay? And these should be pre-established prior to survivors coming to their facilities, okay? They also must have access to a list of designated medical facilities. So a hospital should always know which hospitals have sane or approved sane programs so they know where to transfer them to, all right? And this coordination matters. It reduces confusion. So you never want a survivor to go to a hospital and then they're like, oh, well, we don't do that here. Well, where can we send them? We don't know where to send them, okay? Because it's important for you to have that plan in place, okay? In addition, it minimizes additional trauma that may cause by unnecessary transfers. So we don't want a like CN to transfer a survivor to Advent, right? And then Advent's like, hey, we don't do it here. They need to go to Baylor Scott and White. So we want to make sure that they are being transferred to the appropriate facility. So legal requirements for training, for forensic training. Since September 1st, 2013, Texas law mandated that all emergency departments must have a personnel trained in basic forensic evidence collection, just in case they are not able to actually transfer them to that medical facility that offers. Emergency rooms must always be equipped to provide medical forensic examinations. When it comes to the nursing, specifically the SANE nursing requirements, the Texas Board of Nursing requires that all registered nurses, RNs working in ERs or floating ERs must complete at least a minimum 2-hour forensic course that's available online, okay? Now, survivors have certain rights in those forensic examinations where they are required to have a certified sexual assault nurse examiner to where they are recommended for optimal care, okay? But note that survivors still have that legal right to decline a transfer. So say they finally get to a hospital and they're like, hey, and we don't technically provide those same exams here, they have to consent to that transfer. And if they don't, then they can be able to obtain still a medical forensic exam, basic needs where they first seek care. All right, so let's talk about the medical intake. So of course we talked about, we have our intake form. There's a medical intake that happens. Sexual assault as a medical emergency. So even without visible injuries, you may see a survivor that may or may not have injuries, okay, that you can see. Understand that survivors have immediate medical care, which is essential for their physical and psychological well-being. Medical intake should always be done in a private location within the facility, okay? So a private room, such as a room adjacent to the ER or even a designated private office. When it comes to law enforcement, any law enforcement follow-up interviews also have to be conducted in a private setting for confidentiality purposes, and responding officers should not wait in the examining room during the medical evaluation. So officers are not permitted to be in the room during that same exam. So what is the responding officer's role? So they should remain outside the examination room, but they need to stay on site as needed, okay? And some jurisdictions often require that officers conduct that follow-up examination after the medical examination is completed. Keep in mind that this is only for reporting, right? Now, also when it comes to hospital coding systems for privacy, some hospitals use discrete coding. So you may hear on the intercom code R or code 5 or code SA instead of explicitly labeling sexual assault cases. And this purpose is to protect the survivor's privacy and to reduce public embarrassment. So some key considerations when gathering that medical history, privacy is the priority, okay? As well as advocate support. So survivors have the right to request an advocate to be present, okay? This is Texas state law, and it mandates that advocate must be offered during that process, okay? And this is found in the Texas Code of Criminal Procedures, Article 56.045, okay? Also, advocates have to be trauma informed. So sensitivity in how we're questioning, its aim is to minimize distress, okay? Ensuring survivors feel safe, respected, and in control of the process at all times. So your role of the examination should always be empathetic, okay? So you always have to be empathetic and understanding of the survivor's trauma, okay? The aim of the medical professional should try to establish rapport before that sane exam is done, okay? And that helps to because it helps survivors to feel like they're not alone, and from the pressures from family and friends, and on what they should and shouldn't do. Okay. Only essential questions should be asked to develop a care plan and to ensure appropriate treatment. Okay. Texas law also prioritizes survivors' privacy. So we know that adult survivors are not required to report the assault, except in some cases where a disabled person is reporting abuse, or elderly person. Okay. Regardless of the reporting, we know that survivors are eligible for crime victims, for the medical costs, as well as additional expenses, if the survivor chooses to report. So if the law enforcement is notified, some hospitals will notify law enforcement when anyone involved in a criminal activity, okay, seeks treatment. Survivors must be given that choice whether they're going to receive that medical forensic exam with or without reporting the police, okay? A police report cannot be required as a condition for receiving that medical forensic examination. So it can't be like a quid pro quo. We won't do a medical forensic examination if you don't report, okay? That is Texas state law. In addition to alternative reporting options, sometimes it allows law enforcement to access information for investigating other cases. Survivors are encouraged but not required to file. Okay, so this just helps authorities to track the patterns and also to identify perpetrators. Okay. Mandatory reporting in cases that involve minors. We talked about this in the very beginning, but this discusses how the Texas law on child abuse reporting, found in Texas Family Code 2261.101, which mandates anyone who suspects child abuse, they have to report it. Okay. These reports can be through the hotline, through the Texas Child Protective Services, or you can actually report online at texasabusehotline.org. Okay. Understand there are legal protections for the reporters. So individuals reporting are immune from civil or criminal liability unless acting in bad faith or malice. When it comes to cases involving minors, if that abuse is someone other than the caretaker, the case follows the same procedures as adult survivors. Okay? Understand that medical and social services organizations are legally bound to follow reporting requirements in child abuse cases. So why does having support personnel matters? Okay, so it plays a vital role in how we actually assist survivors of sexual assault through that medical and the legal processes. The key responsibilities are to provide that immediate crisis intervention, assist medical staff, and of course, advise family and friends that may be there on how they can support survivors. Okay, some best practice is, whenever possible, having a consistent support person should be assigned to accompany the survivor throughout the entire process. Comprehensive supportive services, such as additional supportive services, rape crisis centers should be able to connect survivors to counseling, therapy, and other crisis support. So these are a few of the requirements that sexual assault survivors and their victims' rights, okay? Your aim is to also inform them about crime victims compensation, okay? And CVC is great at them being able to access those services because they can pay for counseling and therapy, okay? There's also medical follow-up guidance. So this is a big thing that a lot of survivors actually aren't doing, but we want to encourage them to follow up, okay? Emphasize the importance of that follow-up testing at actual facilities such as STIs, pregnancy follow-ups, and other medical concerns, okay? By providing those post-examination healthcare recommendations that they're given when they leave the hospital, okay? In addition to educating survivors on what their legal rights are, okay? So if they want to apply for a protective order, what are the steps involved in pressing charges, okay? Our role is to educate them on how that process works. By offering also support, sometimes we do police accompaniment. And that may mean that we are, as victim advocates, can attend during police interviews. If it is at the hospital, you can be with the survivor during that interview that happens with that law enforcement. Other legal hearings, and of course, court appearances, which majority of the time happens in our outreach department if the survivor chooses to continue services with FIC, okay? So when we're helping survivors navigate any post-examination, we want to make sure that we're able to answer those questions. Okay, so that is why the importance of this training in helping to clarify what are some available resources that survivors can reach out to and any long-term recovery options. When it comes to hospital and advocacy partnerships, many hospitals do have working agreements with sexual assault programs. Okay, the OAG does encourage hospitals to notify sexual assault advocates as part of their standard treatment protocol. And some benefits of that is number one, it helps to reduce re-victimization. It also helps to strengthen survivor empowerment and facilitate long-term care recovery by connecting survivors to services beyond that medical care. So when it comes to consent, so understand that before any procedure is done, any standard medical practice, before a survivor is given a SANE exam, they have to sign written consent before that happens, okay? Understand that sexual assault survivors have to provide consent for any evidence collection as well and crisis intervention services. Understand that informed consent is not like a one size fits all. It applies to everything. It's more than just signing a form. It's a continuous conversation between the medical personnel and the survivor. Understanding that survivors may be under a lot of stress, so we need to make sure that we are being clear and thorough about the explanations. It's very important, okay? Medical personnel are also responsible for ensuring survivors understand what those procedures are, even if an advocate is present. So what are some limits to written consent? So consent, like we mentioned, does not mean a blank check, okay? Survivors have the right to refuse any certain test. So if they're like, hey, we want to do a CAT scan, and the survivor's like, I don't feel comfortable with that, they cannot perform that, okay? So survivors have the right to refuse any specific test. They do have the right to refuse certain questions or any part of the examination. So if any survivor resists or becomes non-cooperative during any part of that examination, medical personnel should always pause and discontinue that part of the process. Sometimes they could choose to try to return to it later if the survivor does consent, but only if the survivor agrees, okay? Understand that having that support person or an advocate consent, the survivor must provide explicit consent before an advocate is introduced. Now, keep in mind that before we receive those calls, the survivor has already been offered a victim advocate and agreed to have a victim advocate, okay? So, but keep in mind that at any time, the survivor can request removal of the advocate at any time. So if they don't feel comfortable with you being in the room, even after they called before, they can ask you to leave during the portion of the examination, okay? The main aim is we want to respect survivors' choices during the examination, okay? And that is crucial to fostering empowerment and recovery. All right, some special considerations when it comes to minors. So consent for minors. Parents or guardians typically must consent for patients under the age of 18 before they receive medical examination and evidence collections. There are some exceptions under Texas state law, okay? A minor alone can consent for an exam in cases of suspected child abuse, suicide prevention, and medical emergencies, okay? Now, if a survivor is 16 or older and they refuse, an exam cannot be conducted, even with court approval. So keep in mind that what those limitations are when it comes to minors, okay? Now, in certain extraordinary cases where we have severely injured or sometimes incoherent survivors, hospitals should follow certain standard procedures for obtaining consent in those special cases. And the legal framework is made to provide that guidance, but also respect survivor autonomy. All right, everyone, we have finished for discussing the medical forensic collection of evidence. I will actually have the next one actually goes over the sexual assault kit and everything that's in the kit so that you can be aware of what is in the kit. So if a survivor ever has any questions, you're able to answer that, okay? If you haven't already, please watch the already observed uploaded videos that are on the YouTube and let me know when you have watched them and the date that you watched them. All right. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. All right. Thank you very much.